I was standing in my aunt's kitchen at 6 a.m. scrubbing barbecue sauce off plates while everyone else was still sleeping off their food comas from the night before. My hands were raw from washing dishes, my back ached from hours of serving, and there was still dried coleslaw under my fingernails. But it wasn't the physical exhaustion that broke me. It was finding that text message on my phone at 6:47 a.m. that made everything crystal clear. I'd love to know which corner of the globe you're watching from, and if this story speaks to you, make sure to subscribe. Tomorrow's video is one you absolutely can't miss. My name is Jessica Martinez, and what happened at that family barbecue didn't just hurt my feelings. It shattered 23 years of lies I'd been telling myself about what family meant. Growing up in the Martinez family meant understanding your place. And my place, apparently, was in the kitchen. Not at the table, not in the conversations, not in the family photos that would later flood social media. In the kitchen, where the real family members wouldn't have to see me enjoying myself. I should have recognized the pattern years earlier, but when you're living inside something toxic, it doesn't feel toxic. It feels normal. It feels like love. Just a different kind of love. The kind where you show your worth through service, where appreciation comes in the form of more work to do, where being needed feels like being valued. My mother, Carmen Martinez, had this way of making requests that didn't sound like orders. She'd tilt her head and smile, her voice taking on that sing-song tone that meant I was about to spend my weekend doing something I didn't want to do. "Jessica, honey, you know how much better you are at organizing than everyone else. Could you handle the setup for your cousin's graduation party?" And I'd say yes, because being better at organizing felt like a compliment. Because being trusted with important tasks felt like recognition. Because saying no to family wasn't something that occurred to me as an option. The graduation party was typical. I arrived 3 hours early to set up tables, hung decorations until my arms cramped, and spent the entire event refilling food trays and collecting empty plates. When people asked where I'd been, my mother would pat my shoulder and announce, "Jessica's been taking such good care of us. She's got the magic touch with these things." The magic touch, as if my exhaustion was a superpower instead of exploitation. My older brother, David, was the golden child. Stanford graduate, corporate lawyer, married to a woman who came from old money and never let us forget it. David showed up to family events in his BMW, gave everyone firm handshakes, and spent the entire time holding court about his latest business, deals. He'd arrive when the food was ready and leave before cleanup began. Nobody expected him to lift a finger because David was too important and worked so hard all week. My younger sister, Maria, was the baby princess who could do no wrong. She was 21, still in college, still figuring herself out, still deserving of everyone's patience while she found her path. Maria would float through family gatherings, like a butterfly, charming everyone with stories about her sorority, her internships, her complicated dating life. She'd disappear when work needed to be done because Maria was still learning and shouldn't be burdened with adult responsibilities. Then there was me. 23 years old, college graduate, working full-time as a marketing coordinator at a mid-sized firm. But at family events, I wasn't Jessica the professional. I wasn't Jessica the adult. I was Jessica's help. Jessica who didn't mind taking care of everything. Jessica who was so good at making sure everyone was comfortable. The thing about being cast as the family helper is that it starts so young. You don't remember choosing the role. When I was 8, I was praised for helping my grandmother in the kitchen during Christmas dinner. When I was 12, I was the one who remembered everyone's birthdays and made sure cards were signed. When I was 16, I was organizing my cousin's quinceañera because I had such an eye for details. Each time, the praise felt genuine. The gratitude seemed real. My aunts would hug me and tell me I was such a good girl. My uncles would ruffle my hair and call me the responsible one. My mother would beam with pride when other relatives commented on how helpful I was, how mature, how reliable. I thought I was earning love. I thought I was building value. I thought that by being indispensable, I was securing my place in the family. What I didn't realize was that I was programming everyone to see me as a resource instead of a person. By the time I graduated college, the pattern was so established that nobody questioned it. Family birthday party? Jessica would handle the decorations and cleanup. Holiday gathering? Jessica would coordinate the menu and serve the food. Anniversary celebration? Jessica would arrive early to set up and stay late to restore order. I told myself this was what close families did. We took care of each other. We all contributed in our own ways. David contributed to his success, which made the family proud. Maria contributed her youth and charm, which made everyone smile. And I contributed my labor, which made everything possible. The requests had become expectations so gradually that I didn't notice the shift. Could you help with became you'll handle became Jessica always takes care of that. My weekends weren't my own anymore. My vacation days were spent organizing other people's celebrations. My free time was filled with planning, shopping, cooking, cleaning, and coordinating for a family that had learned to depend on me completely, and I let it happen because I didn't know how to be valued any other way. The Martinez family barbecues were legendary in our extended family. Every summer, we'd rent out the pavilion at Riverside Park, and my mother would invite everyone: cousins, aunts, uncles, neighbors, family friends, co-workers. These weren't small gatherings. We're talking 60 to 80 people, enough food to feed a small army, and decorations that would make a wedding planner jealous. Of course, we didn't plan these barbecues. I did. 3 weeks before each barbecue, my mother would call with that familiar tone. Jessica, you know how much everyone looks forward to these, and you're so much better at the details than I am. Then came the lists. The endless, overwhelming lists. I'd spend my lunch breaks calling rental companies to reserve tables and chairs. I'd spend my evenings creating shopping lists for food that would feed 80 people. I'd spend my weekends driving between Sam's Club, the regular grocery store, and specialty shops to gather everything needed. I'd take Friday off work to spend the entire day at the park, setting up tables, arranging decorations, and preparing the space. But the actual barbecue day was when the real work began. I'd arrive at the park at 7 a.m. to start the prep work. Unpacking coolers, setting up the food stations, arranging the serving utensils, making sure everything was perfect before the first guest arrived at noon. While I was working, my mother would show up around 10 a.m. with her coffee, survey my progress, and offer helpful suggestions like maybe the chips should be on the other side of the table, or don't forget to put out the wet wipes. David would roll up around 12:30 after everything was ready, greeting everyone with hugs and jokes about being fashionably late. Maria would arrive at 1 p.m. with her college friends, taking selfies with the beautiful setup and posting them immediately with captions about family time. And I'd spend the next 6 hours running between the kitchen area and the serving stations, making sure food stayed stocked, drinks stayed cold, and everyone stayed happy. When people complimented the organization, my mother would smile and say, "Jessica really outdid herself this time." When people asked where I was during conversations, someone would say, "Oh, Jessica's busy making sure we're all taken care of." The worst part wasn't the work itself. I actually enjoyed cooking and organizing when it was my choice. The worst part was watching everyone else experience the joy I'd created while I experienced only the stress of maintaining it. I'd watch my cousins laughing at a table I'd decorated, eating food I'd prepared, enjoying a party I'd planned, while I stood behind the serving table with a smile that was starting to hurt my face. I'd listen to conversations about weekend plans, vacation stories, and life updates while mentally calculating how much food was left and whether I needed to start another batch of my grandmother's famous salsa. I'd see David relaxing in a chair, beer in hand, telling elaborate stories to a captive audience of relatives who hung on his every word. I'd see Maria dancing to the music I'd chosen, surrounded by friends who'd driven 3 hours to attend our family barbecue, taking pictures that would become her social media content for the next week, and I'd feel this strange mix of pride and emptiness. Pride because everything was going perfectly, because people were having a good time, because I'd made it all possible. Emptiness because I wasn't really part of what I'd created. I was the engine that made it run, but not the passenger who got to enjoy the ride. When people did try to include me in conversations, I'd have to excuse myself to check on something in the kitchen or refill something at the buffet. When someone asked me to sit down and eat, I'd laugh and say, "I'll grab something later after everything's settled." But later never came because there was always something else that needed attention. By 8 p.m., when the party was winding down and people were starting to leave, I'd finally sit down with a plate of cold food and eat alone, while everyone else said their goodbyes. By 9 p.m., when the last guest had left, I'd start the cleanup process that would take another 2 hours, loading tables and chairs back into the rental truck, packing up leftover food into containers for people to take home, bagging up decorations to save for next year, scrubbing down serving tables and collecting trash from around the pavilion. My mother would supervise the cleanup, pointing out spots I'd missed and reminding me which leftovers belonged to which relatives. David would be long gone by then, having left around 7 p.m. to get home to his wife. Maria would help for about 15 minutes before getting distracted by her phone and wandering off to chat with the last few stragglers. And I'd tell myself this was normal. This was how families worked. Everyone contributed in their own way, and this was my way. I was good at this. I was needed. I was making a difference. But deep down, in a place I didn't like to examine too closely, I was starting to feel like a stranger at my own family's parties. The annual Martinez Summer Barbecue was scheduled for Saturday, July 15th. 3 weeks before, like clockwork, my mother called with her familiar request wrapped in that deceptively sweet tone. But this year felt different from the moment she started talking. "Jessica, honey, this year's barbecue is going to be extra special. Your cousin Roberto is bringing his new fiancé, and you know how important first impressions are. I was thinking we could really go all out this time." Going all out, in Martinez family language, meant more work for me. More planning, more shopping, more setup, more everything. But there was something in her voice that made me pay closer attention, an excitement that seemed almost giddy. A lot of love and effort went into bringing this story to life. If you're enjoying it, we'd be so grateful if you'd subscribe to our channel. Now, back to where we left off. I've been talking to your Aunt Sophia, and we think this could be the perfect opportunity to show everyone how successful our family has become. You know, really put our best foot forward. Over the next 3 weeks, the requests kept coming. Not just the usual barbecue preparations, but additional tasks that seemed designed to showcase the family's prosperity. She wanted me to create custom menu cards for each table. She wanted matching tablecloths and centerpieces that would look good in photos. She wanted a dessert station that would rival something you'd see at a wedding. I found myself working late into the evening after my regular job, creating elaborate place settings and hand-lettering menu cards. I spent entire weekends driving to specialty stores in different towns, hunting for the exact shade of coral napkins my mother had seen in a magazine. I took vacation days to prepare homemade decorations that would create the perfect backdrop for family photos. The Thursday before the barbecue, my mother called with one final addition to my list. "Oh, and Jessica, I almost forgot. Sophia suggested we hire some help for serving this year, but I told her we didn't need to spend the money. When you're so good at managing everything, you don't mind handling the serving, do you? It'll give you a chance to make sure everything stays perfect." Something about the way she said it made my stomach twist. The casual dismissal of hired help. The assumption that I'd be working instead of enjoying the party. The way she framed my labor as a favor to the family rather than a sacrifice of my own enjoyment. But I said yes, like I always did. Because saying no felt impossible. Because disappointing the family felt worse than disappointing myself. Saturday morning arrived with that oppressive July heat that makes everything feel sticky before you even step outside. I loaded my car with supplies at 6 a.m. and drove to Riverside Park while the rest of the family was still sleeping. The pavilion looked enormous and empty in the early morning light, and I felt a familiar knot of anxiety in my stomach as I calculated everything that needed to be done. By 11 a.m., I had transformed the space into something that looked like it belonged in a magazine. Coral and cream tablecloths, mason jar centerpieces filled with wildflowers, string lights creating a warm glow even in daylight. The food stations were arranged with military precision, each dish labeled with the hand-lettered cards I'd spent hours creating. My mother arrived at 11:30, surveyed my work, and nodded approvingly. "This looks wonderful, Jessica. Everyone's going to be so impressed." Then she disappeared to get ready, leaving me to handle the final preparations alone. David arrived at noon sharp, looking polished in his designer casual wear, and immediately began greeting early guests as if he'd had anything to do with creating the beautiful setting they were complimenting. Maria showed up 15 minutes later with 3 college friends, all of them dressed like they were attending a garden party rather than a family barbecue. The guests started arriving in earnest around 12:30, and I found myself trapped behind the serving stations, watching the party unfold from a distance. But this time, something felt different. This time, I was paying attention in a way I'd never paid attention before. I watched David accept compliments about the beautiful setup without mentioning my name. I watched Maria pose for photos with the decorations I'd made, posting them to Instagram with captions about family traditions and blessed gatherings. I watched my mother glide through conversations, graciously accepting praise for hosting such an elegant event. And slowly, I began to realize that I wasn't just helping with the family barbecue. I was at the family barbecue. I was the reason. It looked beautiful, tasted delicious, and ran smoothly. But somehow, I had become invisible in the process. Around 2 p.m., my Aunt Sophia approached the serving station where I was refilling the salad bowls. Sophia was my mother's older sister, a woman who prided herself on speaking her mind and never sugarcoating anything. "Jessica, honey, you've really outdone yourself this time. This whole setup is absolutely gorgeous. You should be proud." I smiled and thanked her. But something in her expression made me pause. There was a kind of pity in her eyes that I'd never noticed before. "You know," she continued, lowering her voice, "when your mother told me you were handling all of this yourself, I offered to chip in for some catering help. Seems like a lot for one person to manage." The words hit me strangely. "What did she say?" Sophia glanced around to make sure we weren't being overheard. "She said you preferred to do it yourself. That you were very particular about how things should be done and wouldn't want strangers messing with your vision." I felt something cold settle in my chest. My mother had never asked me if I wanted help. She'd never mentioned Sophia's offer. She'd simply decided that I would handle everything alone, and then created a narrative that made it seem like my choice. "But Sophia," I heard myself saying, "I never said I preferred to do it alone." Sophia's expression shifted, and I could see her processing this information. "Oh," she said quietly. "Oh, honey." Before I could ask what she meant, my cousin Roberto appeared with his fiancée, a polished woman named Catherine, who looked like she'd stepped out of a Ralph Lauren catalog. Roberto was beaming as he introduced her to everyone within earshot. "Catherine, this is my cousin Jessica. She's the one who put this whole amazing party together." Catherine smiled politely and shook my hand. "Oh, how wonderful. Are you an event planner?" "No, I work in marketing. This is just a family thing." "Well, you have incredible talent. This could easily be a professional event. You should consider starting a side business." Roberto laughed. "Jessica's always been our family's secret weapon for parties. She's got the magic touch." There it was again. The magic touch. as if my exhaustion and sacrifice were some kind of supernatural gift rather than unpaid labor. Catherine looked confused. Wait, so you planned and set up this entire event by yourself? For 80 people? Jessica doesn't mind, Roberto said before I could answer. She's always been the organized one. She actually enjoys this stuff. I watched Catherine's expression change as she processed what Roberto was saying. Her smile became more forced, and she glanced around the elaborately decorated pavilion with what looked like newfound understanding. That's quite a lot of work for one person, she said carefully. Oh, but Jessica's used to it. My mother's voice interrupted as she joined our conversation. She's been doing this for years. She has such a knack for making everything special. Catherine looked directly at me. And you enjoy spending your weekends working on other people's parties? The question hung in the air like smoke. It was such a simple question, but nobody had ever asked it before. They'd all assumed the answer was yes because I'd never complained. Because I'd never said no. Because I'd smiled and worked and made everything beautiful year after year. But standing there, looking at Catherine's genuinely curious face, I realized I didn't know how to answer. Did I enjoy it? Had I ever enjoyed it? Or had I just convinced myself I enjoyed it because the alternative was admitting I'd been taken advantage of for years? I started, but my mother smoothly interrupted. Of course she does. Jessica's always been happiest when she's taking care of everyone else. It's just her nature. Catherine's eyes flicked between my mother and me, and I could see her trying to understand the dynamic she'd stumbled into. Well, she said finally, it's beautiful work. You should be sitting down and enjoying it instead of working the whole time. My mother laughed, that light, dismissive laugh that always made me feel small. Oh, Jessica doesn't mind staying busy. Besides, someone has to make sure everything runs smoothly. The kitchen staff eats later, you know? The words hit me like a physical blow. Kitchen staff eats later. She'd said it with a smile like it was a joke, but the meaning was crystal clear. I wasn't family enjoying a family barbecue. I was staff. I was the help. I was expected to work while everyone else celebrated, and then maybe, if I was lucky, I could grab some cold leftovers when my duties were finished. Catherine's face went pale. Even Roberto looked uncomfortable. But my mother just smiled that bright hostess smile and moved on to greet other guests, as if she hadn't just revealed exactly how she saw my role in the family. I stood there frozen, spatula in hand, feeling like I'd been slapped. Kitchen staff eats later. The casual cruelty of it, the way she'd said it so cheerfully, as if it were perfectly normal to treat your own daughter like hired help. But what made it worse was the smirk. That little satisfied smirk that crossed her face as she walked away, as if she'd just put me in my place and was pleased with herself for doing it. For the first time in 23 years, I saw myself through a stranger's eyes. Catherine had looked at me with pity, confusion, and something that might have been horror. She'd seen a young woman spending her weekend working like a servant at her own family's party, and she'd been genuinely shocked that anyone would think that was normal. The rest of the afternoon passed in a haze. I continued serving, refilling, cleaning, and managing, but something fundamental had shifted inside me. Every time someone complimented the food or decorations, I heard my mother accepting the praise. Every time someone asked where I was, I heard the casual dismissal in their voices when they were told I was busy in the kitchen. Around 6 p.m., I finally allowed myself to sit down with a plate of food that had been sitting under heat lamps for hours. I sat alone at the edge of the pavilion, watching my family laugh and celebrate and enjoy the party I'd created for them. David was holding court at the main table, regaling everyone with stories about his latest business trip. Maria was taking photos with her friends, using the beautiful decorations as backdrops for their social media posts. My mother was graciously accepting compliments from other guests about what a wonderful hostess she was, and I was eating cold, potato salad alone, still wearing the apron I'd put on at 7 a.m. that morning, with barbecue sauce stains on my shirt and exhaustion in my bones. that's when I really understood what Catherine had seen. She'd seen a family that had turned one of their own into invisible labor. She'd seen people who took credit for work they hadn't done and accepted praise for sacrifices they hadn't made. She'd seen a family that had forgotten I was a person, not a service. As the sun started to set and guests began leaving, I started the familiar cleanup routine. Loading dishes, packing decorations, breaking down tables. My family members said their goodbyes and headed to their cars, leaving me alone with the aftermath of their celebration. But this time, as I worked in the growing darkness, I wasn't telling myself this was normal. I wasn't convincing myself this was love. I was finally, clearly seeing what this was, and what it was wrong. That night, I couldn't sleep. I lay in my bed staring at the ceiling, my mother's words echoing in my head like a broken record. Kitchen staff eats later. The casual cruelty of it, delivered with that satisfied smirk, had unlocked something in my memory that I'd kept carefully buried for years. Suddenly, I was remembering things differently. Conversations, incidents, family gatherings that I'd filed away as normal were now playing back in my mind with startling clarity. It was like someone had handed me a different lens to view my entire life through, and what I was seeing made my stomach turn. I got up at 3 a.m. and opened my laptop. I started typing, not really knowing what I was documenting, but feeling an urgent need to get these memories out of my head and onto something concrete. What I ended up creating was a timeline of my own exploitation, stretching back further than I'd ever realized. Christmas 2019. I was 21, home from college for winter break. My mother had volunteered at our house to host Christmas dinner for 35 extended family members. I remember being excited about it at first, thinking it would be wonderful to have everyone together in our home. But 3 days before Christmas, my mother sat me down with a notebook full of lists. "Jessica, honey, I know you're on break, but you have so much more energy than I do these days. Would you mind handling the menu planning and shopping? You know exactly what everyone likes." I'd spent my entire winter break meal planning, grocery shopping, cooking, and serving. While my cousins enjoyed their vacation time, while David came home to relax and be pampered, while Maria got to play the role of charming college student. Regaling everyone with her adventures, I was in the kitchen from dawn until midnight every day. But here's what I remembered now that I hadn't understood then. My mother hadn't been too tired or too busy to plan Christmas dinner. She'd been posting on Facebook daily about her yoga classes, her lunch dates with friends, her shopping trips to the outlet mall. She'd had plenty of energy for the things she wanted to do. She just hadn't wanted to do the work of hosting Christmas dinner. So she'd handed it to me, wrapped it in flattery about my energy and abilities, and then spent the entire holiday season accepting compliments about what a wonderful hostess she was. Easter 2020. The pandemic had just started, and large gatherings were canceled, but my mother decided we should do something special for just immediate family. She called it an intimate Easter brunch for 12 people. "Jessica, since you're working from home now, you have so much more flexibility. Could you handle putting together a nice brunch? Nothing too elaborate, just something special to lift everyone's spirits during these difficult times." I'd spent a week planning a menu that would work for dietary restrictions, shopping for ingredients during the height of pandemic panic, and preparing elaborate dishes in my tiny apartment kitchen. I'd driven everything to my parents' house on Easter morning and spent the day serving and cleaning while everyone else enjoyed a relaxing holiday meal. But now I remembered the detail that had bothered me at the time, but that I'd pushed away. My mother had posted photos on Instagram throughout the week leading up to Easter. Photos of herself getting her nails done. Photos of shopping trips with my aunt. Photos of elaborate face masks and home spa treatments. She hadn't been too busy or too stressed to plan Easter brunch. She'd been treating the pandemic like a vacation while I'd been working full-time from home and then spending my free time preparing a holiday meal she'd take credit for, my high school graduation party in 2017. I'd assumed, like most teenagers, that my parents would handle the planning for my own graduation celebration. Instead, 2 weeks before graduation, my mother had sat me down with that familiar, concerned expression. "Jessica, you know how particular you are about things being just right. I was thinking maybe you'd like to plan your own graduation party, so you can make sure it's exactly what you want." At 17, I'd been flattered. I'd thought she was giving me control over my own celebration, treating me like an adult, trusting me with important decisions. I'd spent 2 weeks planning, shopping, decorating, and cooking for my own graduation party. But now, 6 years later, I could see what had really happened. She'd made me plan my own party so she wouldn't have to do the work. Then she'd spent the entire event accepting congratulations from other parents about what a lovely celebration she'd hosted for her daughter. I'd literally planned, prepared, and hosted my own graduation party while my mother took credit for it. The memories kept coming, each one reframing itself in this new, horrible light. My cousin Elena's baby shower in 2018. My mother had volunteered to host it, then immediately handed all the planning to me. "You're so creative with these things, Jessica, and you understand what young mothers need better than I do." I'd spent weeks creating handmade decorations, researching baby shower games, preparing food that would photograph well for Elena's social media posts. I'd worked for hours setting up my parents' backyard to look like something out of a magazine. During the shower, I'd been so busy serving food, coordinating games, and managing logistics that I'd barely had time to talk to Elena herself. Meanwhile, my mother had spent the entire event socializing, posing for photos, and accepting praise for hosting such a beautiful celebration. Elena had thanked my mother profusely at the end of the day, telling her she was the most thoughtful hostess and that the shower was absolutely perfect. My mother had flowed under the praise, never once mentioning that she'd had nothing to do with any of it. My birthday dinners over the years started taking on a different meaning too. I'd always wondered why they felt more stressful than celebratory. And now I understand. Even my own birthday celebrations had become my responsibility to manage. "Jessica, you know that restaurant you love downtown? Why don't you make reservations for your birthday dinner? You know exactly what time works best and which table you'd prefer. Jessica, since you're so good at coordinating these things, could you send out the invitations for your birthday party? You know everyone's contact information better than I do. Jessica, would you mind picking up your own birthday cake? You know exactly what flavor you want, and I'm not sure I'd choose the right thing." I'd been planning my own birthday celebrations for years, then watching my mother accept thanks from relatives for always throwing such nice parties for Jessica. I'd been managing the guest list, handling the logistics, and doing the coordination work for my own birthday parties while my mother got credit for being a thoughtful parent. But the pattern went deeper than just party planning. Now that I was looking clearly, I could see how it had infected every aspect of our family relationships. When my grandmother had been in the hospital the previous year, guess who had been expected to coordinate visiting schedules, communicate with doctors, and manage her care? Me. Not because I was the most qualified or because I'd volunteered, but because Jessica is so organized and responsible, and she has such a good relationship with Grandma. I'd spent weeks juggling work responsibilities with daily hospital visits, making sure someone from the family was there every day, coordinating with nurses and doctors, and keeping everyone updated on her condition. I'd been the primary caregiver and family communicator during one of the most stressful times in our family's recent history. But when relatives called to check on Grandma's condition, they called my mother. When people wanted to send flowers or cards, they sent them to my mother's house. When Grandma recovered and wanted to thank the family member who'd been most helpful during her hospitalization, my mother accepted the thanks and passed along a message that, "We're all just glad you're feeling better." The financial patterns were becoming clear too. I'd never thought of myself as the family's ATM the way some people describe, but now I could see the subtle ways money had been extracted from me over the years. "Jessica, Since you're going to the store anyway, could you grab groceries for Sunday dinner? I'll pay you back. But the payback never came, and asking for it would have made me seem petty. Jessica, could you put the family phone plan on your credit card? It'll be easier to manage, and we'll just send you money for our portions each month. But keeping track of who owed what had somehow become my responsibility, and collecting payments had become an awkward monthly negotiation. Jessica, since you have that good job now, maybe you could start contributing to the family gift fund for birthdays and holidays. Just your fair share, of course. But fair share had gradually increased over the years, and I'd been contributing more to family gifts than anyone else while still being listed as just one of many contributors. I'd been subsidizing family celebrations, covering shared expenses, and managing family finances without realizing it was all falling disproportionately on me. The emotional manipulation tactics were becoming visible too. My mother had perfected the art of making requests that felt like compliments, creating obligation through flattery. You're so much better at this than anyone else. You have such a natural talent for organizing. You're the only one who really understands how to make things special. Everyone always says you have the magic touch. Each compliment had come with an attached responsibility. Each piece of praise had been followed by an expectation. I'd been trained to see my exploitation as recognition, my exhaustion as evidence, of my value to the family, and when I'd occasionally shown signs of resentment or fatigue, the guilt tactics would emerge. I thought you enjoyed doing this. You seemed so excited to help when we talked about it. I just assumed you'd want to be involved since you're always so good at these things. We can get someone else to do it if you don't want to help your family. That last one was particularly effective because it reframed my boundaries as selfishness. It made saying no to unreasonable requests seem like abandoning my family rather than protecting my own well-being. But perhaps the most insidious pattern was how they'd gradually isolated me from experiencing the joy of the events I created. While I was working, I wasn't socializing. While I was serving, I wasn't eating. While I was managing logistics, I wasn't making memories. I'd been turned into the engine that powered family celebrations while being excluded from actually celebrating. I'd been made essential to everyone else's happiness, while my own happiness became irrelevant. By dawn, I had filled 12 pages with memories, patterns, and incidents that I'd never connected before. What I was looking at was a systematic, years-long campaign to turn me into unpaid labor for my own family. They'd found my weaknesses, my desire to be helpful, my fear of disappointing people, my need to feel valued, and they'd exploited them to create a dynamic where I served them while they took credit. But the most devastating realization was how intentional it had been. These weren't accidents or oversights. These weren't cases of people not realizing how much work they were asking me to do. They'd known exactly what they were doing. My mother's comment about kitchen staff eating later hadn't been a slip of the tongue. It had been the truth, finally spoken out loud. That's exactly how she saw me. Kitchen staff, help, labor, not family. And that smirk? That had been satisfaction at putting me in my place, at reminding me of my role in the family hierarchy, at making sure I didn't forget that I was there to serve, not to be served. As the sun came up, I closed my laptop and made a decision that would change everything. I wasn't going to pretend this was normal anymore. I wasn't going to tell myself this was love anymore. I wasn't going to volunteer for my own exploitation anymore. But I also wasn't going to confront them yet. Because I had a feeling that once I stopped playing my assigned role, their true colors would show themselves more clearly than any argument I could make. The call came on a Tuesday morning, exactly 3 days after I'd spent the entire night documenting my family's systematic exploitation. I was sitting at my desk at work, trying to focus on a marketing campaign for a client, when my phone buzzed with my mother's contact photo. I almost didn't answer. For the first time in my adult life, seeing her name on my phone made my stomach clench with dread instead of automatic obligation. But old habits die hard, And I picked up on the fourth ring. "Jessica, honey, thank goodness you answered. We have a situation." "No, hello." "No, how are you?" No acknowledgement that we hadn't spoken since the barbecue 3 days ago, when she'd called me kitchen staff in front of my cousin's fiancé. Just straight into whatever crisis requires my immediate attention and labor. "What's wrong?" I asked, though part of me already knew this wasn't going to be a real emergency. It was going to be another manufactured urgency designed to mobilize me into action. "Your cousin Patricia is getting engaged this weekend, and the family wants to throw her a surprise engagement party. But here's the thing. It has to be this Sunday because that's the only day Ricardo's family can come into town. I know it's short notice, but you're so good at pulling things together quickly." I felt something cold and hard settle in my chest. A surprise engagement party. For this Sunday. 5 days away. And somehow this had already become my responsibility to orchestrate. "Mom, why are you telling me this? Shouldn't Patricia's parents be planning her engagement party?" There was a brief pause, and I could practically hear my mother recalibrating her approach. "Well, of course they want to help, but you know how Uncle Miguel gets overwhelmed by party planning. And Aunt Rosa has been so busy with her work lately. They specifically asked if you might be willing to coordinate things since you did such a beautiful job with the barbecue." The lie was so smooth, so practiced, that I almost believed it myself. Almost. But now I was listening with different ears, and I could hear the manipulation tactics I'd been blind to for years. They specifically asked for me. Of course they did, because asking for me meant they didn't have to ask directly. It meant they could frame this as a favor Patricia's parents were requesting, rather than another family obligation being dumped on my shoulders. "What exactly are you asking me to do?" "Oh, nothing too elaborate. Just coordinate the basics. Find a venue, arrange for food, maybe some simple decorations. You know, the kinds of things you're naturally good at. Nothing too elaborate. The basics. Simple decorations." The language was designed to make it sound easy, manageable, like something I could handle without much effort. But I'd heard this language before, and I knew what it actually meant. Find a venue on 5 days' notice for a party that hadn't been planned yet. Coordinate food for an unknown number of guests with unknown dietary restrictions. Create decorations. That would look good enough for social media photos, but had to be planned, purchased, and assembled in less than a week. How many people are we talking about? Oh, not too many. Patricia's immediate family, Ricardo's family, a few close friends. Maybe 40 or 50 people? 40 or 50 people. Not too many. Simple party, 5 days' notice. I felt something snap. Inside me. Like a rubber band that had been stretched too far for too long. This wasn't a request. This wasn't even really a favor. This was an assignment. A unilateral decision that I would spend my weekend working for free to create another family celebration that I wouldn't get to enjoy. But for the first time in my adult life, instead of automatically saying yes, I heard myself saying something different. No. The word hung in the air like smoke. Simple, clear, final. No excuses, no explanations, no apologies. Just no. What do you mean, no? My mother's voice had shifted from sweet and cajoling to sharp and confused. I mean, I'm not planning. Patricia's engagement party. If Uncle Miguel and Aunt Rosa want to throw their daughter a party, they can plan it themselves. Jessica? What's gotten into you? This is family. Patricia would be so hurt if we didn't do something special for her engagement. And there it was. The guilt manipulation I'd been trained to respond to since childhood. Patricia would be hurt. Not by her own parents' lack of planning, not by the impossible timeline, not by the unreasonable expectations. She'd be hurt by me, by my selfishness, by my failure to sacrifice my weekend for her happiness. But something had fundamentally changed in me over the past 3 days. The part of me that used to cave to guilt had been replaced by something harder and clearer. Patricia will only be hurt if someone tells her that a party was planned and then canceled because I refused to do the work. If no one mentions a party to her, she won't know to be disappointed. But the family is expecting me to work for free on 5 days' notice to solve a problem they created by poor planning. That's not my responsibility. My mother's voice took on that familiar tone of wounded disbelief. I can't believe you're being so selfish. This is your cousin's engagement. This is a once-in-a-lifetime celebration. Then maybe her parents should celebrate it instead of dumping the work on me. Jessica, I don't know what's come over you, but this attitude is very disappointing. We've always been able to count on you. Count on me. There it was, the core of the whole dynamic laid bare. They'd always been able to count on me to say yes, to absorb the work, to prioritize their convenience over my own well-being. And now that I was refusing to be counted on in that way, I was being selfish and disappointing. You've been able to count on me to work for free while you take credit. But that's not happening anymore. That's not fair, Jessica. We appreciate everything you do. You appreciate the results. You don't appreciate me. If you appreciated me, you wouldn't expect me to plan a party in 5 days. If you appreciated me, you wouldn't have called me kitchen staff at the barbecue. There was a long silence. I could hear my mother breathing and could practically feel her scrambling for a response that would put me back in my place. I was just joking about the kitchen staff thing. You know I didn't mean anything by it. You smirked when you said it. You were pleased with yourself. That wasn't a joke. That was you telling me exactly how you see my role in this family. Jessica, you're being very dramatic about this. We're talking about helping your cousin celebrate her engagement. This shouldn't be such a big deal. Dramatic. The dismissal I'd been hearing my entire life whenever I expressed any dissatisfaction with how I was being treated. Any complaint, any boundary, any sign of self-respect was labeled as drama, as overreaction, as evidence that I was being unreasonable. If it's not a big deal, then Patricia's parents can handle it. If it is a big deal, then maybe you should have started planning more than 5 days in advance. Fine, my mother said, her voice turning cold and clipped. I'll tell Uncle Miguel that you're too busy to help family. I'm sure he'll understand. Another manipulation tactic, making my refusal sound like a scheduling conflict rather than a boundary. Framing it as me being too busy rather than me refusing to be exploited. Setting up a narrative where I'd look selfish to other family members, but I was done caring about how my boundaries looked to people who'd been benefiting from my lack of boundaries for years. You can tell Uncle Miguel whatever you want, but if anyone asks me directly, I'll tell them the truth, that I was asked to plan a party for 50 people in 5 days with no compensation, and I declined. Jessica, I really think you need to reconsider this attitude. Family comes first, and right now you're putting yourself before everyone else. Family comes first. The rallying cry of dysfunctional families everywhere. The phrase used to justify every unreasonable demand, every exploitative expectation, every sacrifice that benefited everyone except the person making it. No, Mom. Right now I'm putting myself on equal footing with everyone else. David doesn't plan family parties. Maria doesn't coordinate family events. They both put themselves first all the time, and nobody calls them selfish for it. That's different. David has important work responsibilities, and Maria is still in school. I have important work responsibilities too, and Maria is 21 years old, not a child. But somehow my time and energy are expendable while theirs aren't. I could hear my mother getting flustered, could sense her running out of her usual manipulation tactics. When guilt didn't work and martyrdom didn't work, she usually moved to anger and threats. Well, I hope you're happy with this decision, Jessica. I hope being stubborn is worth hurting your family relationships. There it was. The threat. The implication that setting boundaries would cost me my place in the family. That refusing to be exploited would result in being excluded, rejected, cut off from the people who were supposed to love me unconditionally. But I'd already been excluded. I'd been turned into kitchen staff, relegated to service roles, denied the joy of the celebrations I created. The relationship she was threatening to damage had already been damaged beyond repair. I'm not hurting family relationships, Mom. I'm revealing what they actually are. What's that supposed to mean? It means if my value to this family is based entirely on my willingness to provide free labor, then these aren't relationships. They're transactions, and I'm opting out of transactions that only benefit other people. Jessica, you're talking like we don't love you. Of course we love you. You love what I do for you. That's not the same thing as loving me. Another long silence. I could hear my mother struggling with a response to something she'd probably never considered before. In her mind, love and service had probably become so intertwined that she couldn't separate them. I think you need to take some time to think about what you're saying. You're obviously upset about something, but taking it out on Patricia isn't fair. Even in the face of my clearly stated boundaries, she was still trying to reframe this as me taking something out on someone else. Still trying to make my refusal to work for free seem like an attack on Patricia rather than a decision about my own well-being. I'm not taking anything out on anyone. I'm simply declining to plan an event that I wasn't consulted about, don't have time for, and won't be compensated for. That's not an attack on Patricia. That's just a normal response to an unreasonable request. Fine, Jessica. Have it your way. But don't expect us to pretend this is normal behavior. And there it was. The final threat. The suggestion that my normal, healthy boundary setting was abnormal, that my refusal to be exploited was deviant behavior. That wouldn't be tolerated or accepted. I'm not asking you to pretend anything. I'm asking you to respect my decision and stop trying to manipulate me into changing it. I'm not manipulating you, I'm trying to help you see reason. But I could hear the exhaustion in her voice. She'd run through her entire playbook of guilt, obligation, threats, and gaslighting, and none of it had worked. For the first time in our relationship, her manipulation tactics had hit a wall they couldn't breach. Mom, I have to get back to work. If Patricia wants to celebrate her engagement, she and her parents can plan something themselves. If they need advice or suggestions, they can ask me, and I'll be happy to help with ideas. But I won't be coordinating, planning, or executing anything. Jessica, this conversation is over. I'll talk to you later. I hung up the phone and sat in my office chair, trembling slightly from adrenaline. I'd just done something I'd never done in my entire adult life. I'd set a clear, firm boundary with my family and held it in the face of every manipulation tactic they could throw at me. And it felt terrifying and exhilarating at the same time. My phone buzzed immediately with a text message from my mother. I really hope you'll reconsider this decision. Patricia is family, and family comes first. I stared at the message for a long moment, then typed back, family doesn't ask other family members to work for free on impossible timelines. Family respects boundaries. Then I turned off my phone and went back to work. But I knew this was just the beginning. I'd just declared war on a family dynamic that had been entrenched for over 2 decades. And families like mine don't give up their unpaid labor without a fight. The silence lasted exactly 18 hours. For almost a full day after I'd hung up on my mother, my phone stayed quiet. No follow-up calls, no text messages, no family group, chat notifications. It was the longest I'd gone without some form of family communication in years, and I found myself both relieved and oddly anxious about the stillness. But I should have known they were strategizing. Wednesday afternoon, my phone rang during my lunch break. David's name flashed on the screen, which was unusual. My brother rarely called me directly unless he needed something specific, and we'd never had the kind of relationship where we checked in on each other regularly. Hey, Jess, how's it going? His tone was carefully casual, artificially friendly. I could hear the setup coming from a mile away. I'm fine, David. What's up? Can a brother call his sister just to say hi? He laughed, but it sounded forced. Actually, I was talking to Mom, and she mentioned you were feeling a little overwhelmed lately. I wanted to check in and see if everything's okay. Feeling overwhelmed. That's how my refusal to plan Patricia's engagement party had been translated in the family narrative. Not that I'd set a reasonable boundary, not that I'd declined an unreasonable request, but that I was overwhelmed and therefore not thinking clearly. I'm not overwhelmed, David. I just told Mom I wouldn't plan Patricia's engagement party on 5 days' notice. Right. And I totally get that. 5 days is pretty short notice. His voice carried that patronizing tone he used when he wanted to seem reasonable while preparing to deliver a lecture. But here's the thing, Jess. This is Patricia we're talking about. She's been like a sister to us since we were kids. And you know how much family means to all of us. Patricia had been like a sister to us. Interesting how David had never felt compelled to plan any events for this sister-like cousin. Somehow his fraternal obligations didn't extend to party coordination and unpaid labor. If Patricia means so much to the family, then her actual parents can plan her party. Come on, Jess. You know Uncle Miguel isn't good with that kind of stuff. And Aunt Rosa works those crazy nursing shifts. They're both stressed about making this special for Patricia. Then they can hire a wedding planner or an event coordinator. People plan engagement parties all the time without relying on unpaid family labor. David sighed heavily, like I was being deliberately difficult. Look, I know you've been working hard lately, and maybe you're feeling unappreciated, but taking it out on Patricia isn't really fair to her. Taking it out on Patricia. The same reframing my mother had used. My boundary setting was being repositioned as an attack on my cousin, as if refusing to work for free was somehow hurting her personally. I'm not taking anything out on anyone. I'm simply declining to plan an event. Patricia will be just as engaged whether I coordinate a party or not. But this is about more than just the party, isn't it? Mom said you seemed really angry about something at the barbecue. She's worried about you. Mom was worried about me. Of course she was. Worried that her primary source of unpaid labor was developing inconvenient boundaries. Worried that her designated family servant was starting to think of herself as an equal family member. I wasn't angry at the barbecue. I was working the entire time while everyone else celebrated, just like always. Jess, come on. You know we all appreciate what you do. You're so good at making everything special. It's like your superpower. Your superpower. Another way of framing exploitation as a gift, exhaustion as an ability, sacrifice as a special talent that I should be grateful to possess. David, let me ask you something. When was the last time you planned a family event? There was a pause. What do you mean? I mean exactly what I said. When was the last time you coordinated a family birthday party, holiday gathering, or celebration of any kind? Well, I mean, Lisa and I host Thanksgiving sometimes. Lisa plans Thanksgiving. You show up and carve the turkey. When was the last time you personally handled invitations, menu planning, shopping, decorating, cooking, and cleanup for a family event? Another pause, longer this time. That's not really my thing, Jess. You're much better at that stuff than I am. It's not your thing, because you've never been expected to make it your thing. It became my thing because everyone decided my time and energy were less valuable than yours. That's not true. Your time is just as valuable as anyone else's. Then, why are you calling to convince me to spend my weekend working for free instead of calling Uncle Miguel to suggest he hire professional help? Because this is what families do for each other. We help out when someone needs it. No. David, this is what I do for the family. You don't help out when someone needs it. You show up when the work is finished and take credit for being a supportive family member. I could hear him getting frustrated, his carefully reasonable tone starting to crack. Look, I don't know what's gotten into you lately, but this isn't like you. You've always been the one who takes care of everyone else. It's who you are. It's who you are. The most insidious phrase in the manipulator's handbook. The suggestion that exploitation wasn't something being done to me, but something that was fundamentally part of my identity. That being taken advantage of was my authentic self, and refusing that role was somehow fake or forced. No, David, it's who you trained me to be. It's the role I was assigned because it was convenient for everyone else. Jessica, you're being really dramatic about this. It's just a party. If it's just a party, then someone else can plan it. Fine, he said, his fake friendliness finally dissolving completely. But don't expect people to understand this new attitude of yours. Family is supposed to come first, and right now you're acting like you don't care about anyone but yourself. And there it was, the threat disguised as concern. The suggestion that my healthy boundaries were evidence of selfishness, that my refusal to be exploited meant I didn't care about family. I'm acting like I care about myself as much as I care about other people. That's called balance, not selfishness. David hung up without saying goodbye. 20 minutes later, my phone buzzed with a text from Maria. OMG, what is wrong with you? Mom is so upset, and David said you're being super mean about Patricia's party. This isn't like you at all. I stared at the message, marveling at how quickly the family narrative had solidified. In less than 24 hours, my refusal to plan. A last-minute party had been transformed into me being mean, upset, not myself, and causing family distress. I typed back, I declined to plan a party on 5 days' notice. That's not mean, it's reasonable. The response came immediately. But it's Patricia. She's like our sister. And you're literally the only one who knows how to make parties special. Everyone is counting on you. Everyone is counting on you. The family motto that had ruled my life for over 2 decades. The expectation that had turned me into unpaid labor disguised as love. Then everyone needs to learn how to plan their own events. Jessica, what has been your problem lately? You're being so selfish and weird. Patricia is going to be so hurt. If we don't do something amazing for her engagement, Patricia is going to be hurt. Not by her parents' poor planning, not by the unrealistic timeline, not by the family's assumption that someone else would handle everything. She'd be hurt by me, by my selfishness, by my failure to sacrifice my weekend for her happiness. Patricia won't be hurt unless someone tells her a party was planned and canceled. If no one mentions it, she'll never know to be disappointed. That's not the point, Jessica. The point is, we're family, and we're supposed to take care of each other. You used to understand that. I used to understand that. Another version of this isn't like you. The suggestion that my previous willingness to be exploited was the real me, and this new boundary-setting person was some kind of imposter. Instead of responding to Maria, I turned off my phone and went back to work. But the attacks were just getting started. Thursday morning brought a call from Aunt Sophia, the same aunt who had offered to help pay for catering at the barbecue, who had looked at me with pity when she realized I'd been handling everything alone. Jessica, honey, your mother called me, and I'm a little concerned about this situation with Patricia's party. What situation? Well, she said you refused to help plan the engagement celebration, and that's just not like you, sweetheart. You've always been so generous with your time and talents. Generous with my time and talents. As if working for free was generosity rather than exploitation. As if my unpaid labor was a gift I was choosing to give rather than an expectation that had been imposed on me. Aunt Sophia, do you remember what you told me at the barbecue? About offering to pay for catering help? Of course, honey. Do you remember what my mother told you when you offered? There was a pause. She said you preferred to handle things yourself. I never said I preferred to handle things myself. She never asked me if I wanted help. She just told you I preferred to work alone, then made me work alone. Another pause, longer this time. Oh. The same thing is happening with Patricia's party. They're telling everyone I'm refusing to help, But what actually happened is they assigned me to plan a party for 50 people in 5 days without asking if I was available or willing. I see. Aunt Sophia, you have 2 daughters. If one of them got engaged, would you ask your niece to plan the celebration, or would you handle it yourself? I would handle it myself, of course. It's my daughter's engagement. Then why is it reasonable for Uncle Miguel and Aunt Rosa to expect me to plan Patricia's party? I could hear Sophia thinking, and could almost feel her realization dawning. It's not, she said quietly. It's really not. I'm not refusing to help my family. I'm refusing to be the family's unpaid event coordinator. There's a difference. Jessica, honey, I think I owe you an apology. I've been watching you work at family events for years, and I just assumed I thought you enjoyed it. I thought I enjoyed it too, for a long time. But enjoying something when you choose it is different from being obligated to do it whether you want to or not. You're absolutely right. And I'm sorry it took me this long to see it. Sophia's apology felt like the first genuine support I'd received from anyone in the family. But it was quickly overshadowed by the escalating pressure campaign from everyone else. Friday brought a group text to all the cousins, initiated by my mother. Family meeting Sunday 2 p.m. at my house. Important family matters to discuss. Everyone needs to be there. I knew exactly what this was. A tribunal, an intervention, a coordinated effort to pressure me back into my assigned role through public shaming and collective guilt. I responded to the group text. I won't be attending. If you want to discuss something with me, we can do it privately. Within minutes, my phone was buzzing with individual responses. Jessica, you have to come. This affects the whole family. Maria. Don't be childish about this. We need to work this out like adults. David, please reconsider. This is about more than just you. Mom, come on, cuz. We just want to talk. Patricia's message hit differently than the others. She sounded hurt and confused, like she genuinely didn't understand what was happening. And I realized that she probably didn't. She'd probably been told that I was refusing to celebrate her engagement, that I was being selfish and difficult, that I didn't care about her happiness. I called her directly. Patricia, it's Jessica. I saw your message about the family meeting. Jess, thank God you called. I don't understand what's going on. Mom said you don't want to help with my engagement party, and everyone's acting like there's some big drama. But I don't even know what party they're talking about. And there it was. Patricia had never asked for a party. She didn't even know a party was being planned. She was being used as a prop in a drama designed to manipulate me back into compliance. Patricia, let me ask you something. Did you ask anyone to plan an engagement party for you? No, I mean Ricardo and I are thinking about having something next month, but we haven't made any concrete plans yet. We wanted to enjoy being newly engaged for a while before we started planning celebrations. So you never asked anyone in the family to throw you a surprise party this Sunday? This Sunday? No, absolutely not. That's way too soon. And we already have plans to visit Ricardo's grandmother this weekend. The manipulation was even more elaborate than I'd realized. They weren't just using Patricia's engagement as emotional leverage against me. They were planning a party she hadn't asked for, on a day she wasn't available, and then telling everyone she'd be hurt if it didn't happen. Patricia, your mother and my mother decided to plan a surprise engagement party for you this Sunday. When I said I couldn't coordinate it on 5 days' notice, they told everyone I was being selfish and didn't care about celebrating your engagement. What? That's insane. I can't even come to a party this Sunday. And I never asked anyone to plan anything. I know you didn't. But somehow this has become about me refusing to help my family instead of them making unreasonable demands. Jessica, this is so messed up. You shouldn't have to plan my engagement party. If I wanted a party, Ricardo and I would plan it ourselves or ask our parents to help. Can you do me a favor? Can you call your mom and tell her you don't want to party this Sunday? Maybe if it comes from you, they'll stop trying to guilt me into planning it. Absolutely. And Jess? I'm sorry they're putting you through this. This whole thing is crazy. Patricia's support felt like a lifeline. But I knew that one reasonable voice wouldn't be enough to stop the family pressure campaign that was building momentum. Saturday morning brought the final escalation, a voicemail from my father, who rarely involved himself in family drama, but whose intervention usually meant the situation had reached crisis level in my mother's mind. Jessica, it's Dad. Your mother is very upset about this situation with Patricia's party and your attitude lately. She's been crying all week, and I think you need to come to the family meeting tomorrow so we can work this out. This has gone far enough, and you're tearing the family apart over something that should be simple. Call me back. Tearing the family apart. The nuclear option in family manipulation. The suggestion that my boundaries weren't just affecting me, but destroying the entire family structure. That my refusal to be exploited was somehow an attack on family unity rather than a reasonable response to unreasonable demands. But I'd learned something important over the past week. When a dysfunctional family accuses you of tearing them apart, what they really mean is that you're refusing to hold them together through your own sacrifice. And I was finally okay with letting them fall, apart if that's what it took to put myself back together. Sunday afternoon came and went without me. While my family held their intervention meeting at my mother's house, I was 30 miles away at the botanical gardens, walking through the rose maze with my phone on silent. It was the first family meeting I'd ever missed, and the guilt I expected to feel was overwhelmed by something I hadn't experienced in years. Peace. For the first time in my adult life, I was spending a Sunday afternoon doing exactly what I wanted to do, without checking the time, without mental lists of tasks that needed completion, without the low-level anxiety that usually accompanied family obligations. I sat on a bench surrounded by blooming jasmine and realized I couldn't remember the last time I'd felt this relaxed. The voicemails started accumulating around 4 p.m. I could see the notifications piling up, but I didn't listen to them until I got home that evening. When I finally played them back, they told the story of a family grappling with the reality that their unpaid labor source had truly disappeared. Message 1, from David. Jessica, we had the family meeting, and everyone's really concerned about you. We think you might be going through something, maybe work stress or depression, and it's affecting your judgment. We want to help, but you need to meet us halfway. Going through something, depression, affecting my judgment. My healthy boundary setting had been pathologized, turned into a mental health crisis that explained why I was no longer complying with their demands. Message 2, from Maria. Jess, the meeting was really hard. Mom cried the whole time talking about how worried she is about you. Everyone thinks you need professional help because this behavior is so unlike you. Please call us back. Professional help. Because refusing to work for free was apparently a symptom of mental illness, rather than a sign of growing self-respect. Message 3, from my mother. Jessica, I don't know what we did to deserve this treatment, but this has to stop. You're hurting people who love you, and you're hurting yourself. Patricia's party was canceled because of your selfishness. I hope you're happy. Patricia's party was canceled. Not postponed, not rescheduled, not taken over by someone else. Canceled. Because apparently no one else in the family was capable of planning a celebration without me. I called Patricia immediately. Jess, thank God you're calling. Today was absolutely insane. What happened? My mom left a message saying your party was canceled. It was never really a party to begin with. I talked to my mom yesterday like you suggested, and it turns out the whole thing was just an idea my Aunt Carmen had. There was no venue booked, no food ordered, no actual plans made. It was just an assumption that you would handle everything once they decided they wanted to do something. So what happened at the family meeting? Patricia sighed heavily. It was basically a 3-hour discussion about how you've changed and how worried everyone is about your mental state. Your mom kept saying this wasn't like you, and everyone was trying to figure out what was wrong with you instead of talking about the actual problem, which is that they've been treating you like hired help instead of family, and now they're upset that you're not available for hire anymore. It was validating to hear someone else articulate what I'd been struggling to put into words. Patricia understood what the rest of the family was refusing to see. Patricia, can I ask you something? Has anyone ever expected you to plan family events? Are you kidding? My mom won't even let me plan my own birthday party because she says I'm too disorganized. The idea that anyone would expect me to coordinate a family celebration is laughable. What about David or Maria? David. He shows up to events in expensive clothes and makes jokes about being the successful one. Maria spends family gatherings, taking selfies and complaining that the music isn't good enough for her videos. The thought of either of them actually working at a family event is bizarre. But somehow it's normal for me to do all the work? Jessica, I never realized how messed up this was until this week. I've been watching you work at family parties since we were kids, and I just thought, I don't know what I thought. That you liked it maybe? That you were just naturally good at that stuff? But now I see it was because everyone else was sitting around expecting you to handle everything. That conversation with Patricia became a turning point. Having someone from inside the family validate my experience gave me the courage to start making bigger changes. Monday morning, I called in sick to work. Not because I was physically ill, but because I needed time to think clearly about what I wanted my life to look like going forward. I'd spent so many years reacting to other people's demands that I'd never developed a clear sense of what I actually wanted for myself. I started by making lists. What did I enjoy doing when I wasn't managing other people's events? What did I want to learn? What experiences had I been putting off because I was always too busy serving others? The lists revealed gaps in my life that I'd never noticed before. I hadn't read a book for pleasure in months. I hadn't traveled anywhere that wasn't family-related in over a year. I hadn't pursued any hobbies or interests that weren't somehow connected to taking care of other people. I'd become so focused on being useful to others that I'd forgotten how to be interesting to myself. Tuesday, I signed up for a pottery class that met on Thursday evenings. It was something I'd always wanted to try but never had time for because Thursday evenings were usually spent preparing for weekend family obligations. Wednesday, I booked a solo weekend trip to Asheville for the following month. I'd never traveled alone before, and the idea was both terrifying and exhilarating. Thursday, I went to my first pottery class and discovered something I'd forgotten. I was capable of learning new skills just for the joy of learning them. The clay didn't care if I was useful to anyone else. It only responded to my own hands, my own patience, my own creative impulses. Friday brought another family crisis call from my mother. Jessica, your Aunt Rosa called me crying yesterday. She said Patricia told her some very hurtful things about how the family treats you, and now Rosa feels terrible about the engagement party situation. I waited for the manipulation to start, but something in my mother's voice sounded different. Tired, maybe. Less certain than usual. What did Patricia tell her? She said that we've been treating you like hired help for years, and that the engagement party was just the latest example of us expecting you to work for free, while everyone else enjoys the results. That's accurate. There was a long pause. Jessica, is that really how you see it? That we've been treating you like hired help? It was the first time my mother had asked me directly about my experience instead of telling me how I should feel about it. Mom, when was the last time you planned a family event yourself? I coordinate things. I make sure everything gets handled. You delegate things to me. That's not the same as coordinating. But you're so good at it. You have such an eye for details. I'm good at it because I've had years of practice doing it alone. But being good at something doesn't mean I should be required to do it for free, forever. Another long pause. I never thought about it that way. I know you didn't. But I need you to think about it now. Jessica, what do you want from us? How do we fix this? It was the first time anyone in my family had asked what I wanted, instead of telling me what I should want. I want to be included in family events as a family member, not as staff. I want to be asked if I'm available to help instead of being told what I'm expected to handle. And I want other people to take turns being responsible for family celebrations. But what if they don't do it as well as you do? Then the events won't be as perfect, and that's okay. Perfect parties aren't worth sacrificing family relationships. I need to think about this, Jessica. This is all very different from how I understood things. Take all the time you need, Mom. But I'm not going back to the way things were. That weekend, instead of spending Saturday preparing for a family obligation, I drove to a farmer's market I'd never visited before. I bought flowers for my apartment, not for an event. I tried samples of local honey and artisanal cheese. I sat at a picnic table and read a book without checking my phone every 10 minutes. Sunday, instead of attending a family gathering, I met a friend from work for brunch. We talked about her art projects and my pottery class. We discussed books we'd read and places we wanted to travel. We had a 2-hour conversation that wasn't interrupted by anyone needing me to handle something. It was the most connected I felt to another person in months, and it made me realize how isolated I'd become in my role as family coordinator. The following week brought unexpected developments. David called on Wednesday, but instead of trying to convince me to return to my old role, he had a different agenda. Jess, I've been thinking about our conversation last week, and I owe you an apology. I was so surprised I almost dropped the phone. What? You were right when you said I've never planned a family event, and you were right that it's not fair to expect you to handle everything just because you're good at it. David, what brought this on? Lisa and I were talking about it, and she pointed out that if my sister was doing all the work for my family's celebrations, she'd be pretty pissed off about it. She made me realize that just because you never complained doesn't mean you were okay with the arrangement. I'm glad you see that now. So here's what I want to propose. Mom's birthday is coming up next month, and instead of assuming you'll handle it, I want to plan it myself. Will you help me figure out how to do that? It was such an unexpected request that I had to ask him to repeat it. You want to plan Mom's birthday party yourself? Yeah. I mean, I'll probably need advice and maybe some guidance, but I want to take responsibility for it. Lisa's going to help, and we figured it was time I learned how to do this stuff. David, I would be happy to give you advice. That's completely different from doing all the work myself. Good. And Jess? I'm sorry it took me this long to realize what we were doing to you. That phone call marked the beginning of a shift in family dynamics that I never could have anticipated. When people started taking responsibility for their own celebrations instead of defaulting to me, they began to understand why I'd been so exhausted and overwhelmed for years. Maria called the following week to ask for help planning a birthday party for her roommate. But instead of expecting me to coordinate everything, she wanted me to teach her how to do it herself. I realized I'm 21 years old and I don't know how to plan a party, she admitted. That's actually pretty embarrassing. Will you show me how you figure out all the logistics? We spent an afternoon going through the process step by step. How to calculate food quantities, how to coordinate timing, how to handle decorations and setup. Maria took notes like she was studying for an exam. This is actually pretty complicated, she said as we worked through the timeline. I never realized how much thinking goes into making everything look effortless. It's not effortless. It just looks that way because someone put in the effort ahead of time. I feel really bad that we just expected you to know how to do all this stuff automatically. I learn by doing it over and over again. You can learn the same way. By the end of our planning session, Maria had a complete party coordination binder and a new appreciation for the work that goes into family celebrations. The most surprising change came from my mother. 3 weeks after our phone conversation about being treated like hired help, she called with an unusual request. Jessica, I want to take you to lunch. Not to ask you to plan anything or coordinate anything, just to spend time with my daughter. We met at a quiet restaurant downtown. And for the first time in years, we had a conversation that wasn't interrupted by lists, logistics, or requests for assistance. "I've been doing a lot of thinking since our last conversation," she began. "And I've realized that somewhere along the way I stopped seeing you as my daughter and started seeing you as my solution to everything." "Mom, no, let me finish. I convinced myself that asking you to handle family events was a way of including you, of giving you a special role in the family. But the truth is, it was just easier for me to let you do the work than to do it myself. I don't think you meant to hurt me. Intent doesn't matter if the impact was harmful. And it was harmful, wasn't it? Yes, it was. I'm sorry, Jessica. I'm sorry I took advantage of your willingness to help. I'm sorry I made you responsible for everyone else's happiness. And I'm sorry it took you setting boundaries for me to realize what I was doing. It was the first genuine apology I'd received from anyone in my family. And it meant more to me than I could have imagined. What happens now, Mom? Now I learn how to plan my own events and coordinate my own celebrations. And now I get to know my daughter as a person instead of as an unpaid employee." That lunch lasted 3 hours, and we talked about things we'd never discussed before. My job, my interests, my goals, my thoughts about relationships and career and life. My mother asked questions about my pottery class, my upcoming trip to Asheville, the books I'd been reading. For the first time in my adult life, I felt like my mother was genuinely interested in who I was rather than just what I could do for her. The transformation wasn't complete or perfect. There were still moments when family members would slip back into old patterns, making requests that sounded suspiciously like assignments. But now I had the tools and confidence to redirect those conversations. "That sounds like something you could handle yourself, but I'm happy to give you advice if you need it. I'm not available to coordinate that, but here are some resources that might help you plan it. That's not something I can take on right now, but let me know if you want to brainstorm ideas." Setting boundaries became easier with practice, and the guilt that used to accompany them began to fade as I saw the positive changes in my family relationships. People started appreciating my actual contributions instead of taking them for granted. When I chose to help with something, it was received as a gift rather than an expectation. When I shared my time and energy, it was valued rather than assumed. Most importantly, I began to understand the difference between being needed and being used. My family needed me as a daughter, sister, and cousin. They'd been using me as unpaid labor. Now that the using had stopped, we could focus on actually needing each other in healthy, reciprocal ways. The transformation wasn't just about changing how my family treated me. It was about changing how I saw myself, how I spent my time, and what I considered possible for my own life. I was no longer the family's solution to everything. I was just Jessica, and for the first time in years, that felt like enough. 6 months. Later, I stood in my kitchen on a Saturday morning, making coffee for one and planning a day that belonged entirely to me. No family obligations, no event coordination, no mental lists of tasks that needed completion for other people's celebrations. Just Saturday morning sunlight streaming through my windows and the luxury of deciding moment by moment how to spend my time. My phone buzzed with a text from Patricia. "Jess, Ricardo and I finally set a date for our engagement party. Next month. We're handling all the planning ourselves. But would you like to come as a guest? You know, someone who actually gets to eat the food while it's still hot?" I laughed out loud. Patricia had become one of my strongest allies in the family, and her sense of humor about our shared history was both healing and validating. I texted back, "I would love to attend as an actual guest. What a novel concept." Her response came immediately. "Right? Who knew family members could just show up and enjoy themselves without working? Revolutionary stuff." The transformation in my family relationships over the past 6 months had been remarkable, though not without its challenges. Some changes had come easily once people understood what was being asked of them. Others had required ongoing negotiation and occasional relapses into old patterns. David had successfully planned our mother's birthday party the previous month, and while it wasn't as elaborately coordinated as events I used to orchestrate, it was warm, genuine, and meaningful. More importantly, he'd experienced firsthand the amount of work that goes into making celebrations look effortless. "I had no idea," he'd told me afterward. "I spent 3 weeks planning a party for 20 people and I was exhausted. You used to do this for every family event, and most of them were twice as big. I feel like such an ass for not realizing what we were putting you through." Maria had become surprisingly good at event planning once she started practicing. Her natural creativity, combined with her social media savvy, had resulted in celebrations that were both beautiful and well documented. She'd taken over coordination for most of the younger cousins' birthdays and had discovered she actually enjoyed the process when it was her choice, rather than an assigned obligation. "I like making things special for people," she'd confessed during one of our planning advice sessions. "I just never knew there was a difference between choosing to help and being expected to help." The most significant change had been in my relationship with my mother. Our monthly lunch dates had become a cherished tradition, and our conversations had deepened in ways I never could have anticipated. Without the constant undercurrent of requests and expectations, we discovered we actually enjoyed each other's company. But the transformation extended far beyond family dynamics. The space I'd created by stepping back from my role as family coordinator had been filled with experiences and relationships that fed my soul in ways I'd forgotten were possible. My pottery classes had evolved into a serious hobby. I'd joined the local ceramics guild and was preparing pieces for my first group exhibition. Working with clay had taught me something profound about creation versus service. When I made a bowl, it existed for its own sake, not to solve someone else's problem or meet someone else's need. The quiet satisfaction of creating something beautiful, just for the joy of creation, had become a cornerstone of my new life. The solo trip to Asheville had been the first of many adventures I'd started taking by myself. I'd discovered I enjoyed my own company, that I was capable of navigating new places and experiences without someone else's approval or participation. Travel had become a way of reminding myself that the world was bigger than my family's needs and expectations. I'd also started dating again, something I'd barely had time for when my weekends were consumed by family obligations. Meeting someone who had no investment in my role as family helper had been eye-opening. When James, a fellow ceramics enthusiast, asked what I did for fun, I'd actually had genuine answers that didn't involve other people's celebrations. "You seem so present," he told me after our third date. "Like you're really here, in your own life, instead of constantly thinking about somewhere else you need to be." His observation had struck me deeply because he was right. For the first time in years, I was fully inhabiting my own life, instead of living in service to everyone else's. The most unexpected development had been the messages I'd started receiving from other people who'd heard about my situation through mutual friends or social media connections. Apparently, my story wasn't as unique as I'd thought. Sarah, a coworker's sister, had reached out after hearing about my family boundary-setting journey. She'd been struggling with similar dynamics in her own family, where she'd been designated as the primary caregiver for aging parents, while her siblings lived their lives without the same level of responsibility. "I don't know how to stop being the one who handles everything without feeling like I'm abandoning people who need me," she'd written in her first email. We'd started meeting for coffee monthly, and I'd shared the strategies that had worked for me. The key insight I'd developed was the difference between helping and enabling. Helping meant providing support that empowered others to handle their own responsibilities. Enabling meant taking on responsibilities that rightfully belonged to other people. Marcus, a neighbor I'd met at the farmer's market, had his own version of family exploitation. He'd been expected to provide financial support to multiple relatives while struggling to build his own financial security. His boundaries around money had required the same kind of firm consistency I'd had to develop around my time and energy. The hardest part, he'd told me, was realizing that some people in my family loved me for what I could provide, rather than who I was as a person. These conversations had led to something I never could have anticipated. I'd started facilitating informal support groups for people struggling with family boundary issues. We met twice a month at a community center, and our discussions covered everything from guilt management to practical strategies for redirecting family expectations. What I'd learned from these interactions was that healthy families don't require one person to sacrifice their well-being for everyone else's comfort. Healthy families distribute responsibility, celebrate each other's boundaries, and find ways to support each other that don't depend on exploitation. The support group had also taught me that transformation is possible at any stage of life. Our oldest member, Eleanor, was 72 and had spent decades as her family's primary caregiver and event coordinator. At 70, she'd decided she was tired of spending her retirement managing everyone else's lives. People kept telling me it was too late to change family patterns at my age, she'd shared. But I realized that if I didn't change them now, I'd spend the rest of my life being frustrated and resentful. Age doesn't make exploitation more acceptable. Eleanor's courage in setting boundaries with adult children and grandchildren who'd grown accustomed to her constant availability had been inspiring to all of us. Her example had shown that it's never too late to reclaim your own life. My work life had improved as well. Without the constant stress of managing family obligations in addition to my professional responsibilities, I'd had energy to focus on advancing my career. I'd been promoted to senior marketing coordinator and had started leading projects that genuinely excited me. My supervisor had noticed the change. "You seem more focused lately," she'd mentioned during my performance review. "More confident in your ideas and more willing to advocate for yourself on project assignments." She was right. Learning to set boundaries with my family had given me skills that translated directly to professional situations. I'd become better at negotiating workload, more comfortable saying no to unreasonable requests, and more effective at advocating for my own interests. But perhaps the most profound change had been in how I understood love and relationships. I'd spent most of my adult life believing that love required self-sacrifice, that being valued meant being useful, that family loyalty meant accepting whatever treatment you received without complaint. Now I understood that real love celebrates boundaries rather than violating them. Real love wants you to be happy and fulfilled, not exhausted and resentful. Real love doesn't require you to set yourself on fire to keep other people warm. The morning text exchange with Patricia had reminded me that we had another family barbecue coming up next month. This time, it was being planned by a rotation committee of family members, with each person taking responsibility for a different aspect of the event. I'd volunteered to handle beverages, a manageable contribution that would take me about 2 hours of shopping and setup, rather than 3 weeks of total coordination. I was actually looking forward to it. For the first time in years, I would attend a family barbecue as a family member rather than as staff. I would eat food while it was still hot, participate in conversations without mental task lists running in the background, and enjoy the celebration I was attending rather than managing. The invitation had come with a note from my mother. "Jessica, thank you for volunteering to handle beverages. We're all excited to have you at the barbecue as our daughter and sister, not as our event coordinator. Love, Mom." That note was now pinned to my refrigerator, a reminder of how far we'd all come. As I finished my coffee and planned my Saturday, I reflected on the lessons that had emerged from this journey. The most important one was that you teach people how to treat you. And if you don't like how you're being treated, you have the power to change the dynamic. But change requires consistency, courage, and a willingness to disappoint people who benefit from your lack of boundaries. It requires accepting that some relationships might not survive your growth, while trusting that the relationships worth keeping will adapt and strengthen. I'd also learned that guilt is often a sign that you're doing something right, rather than something wrong. When I felt guilty about setting boundaries, it usually meant I was protecting myself from exploitation, rather than causing harm to others. The concept of family comes first had been reframed in my understanding. Family should come first when they treat you like family. But when family treats you like staff, employees, or a resource, they've forfeited the right to expect unconditional loyalty and sacrifice. Most importantly, I'd learned that you can't love other people well until you learn to love yourself well. My years of self-sacrifice hadn't made me a better daughter, sister, or cousin. They'd made me resentful, exhausted, and disconnected from my own needs and desires. Now that I was taking care of myself, I had more genuine love and support to offer others. But it was love given freely rather than extracted through manipulation. It was support offered from a place of strength rather than obligation. As I prepared to leave for my pottery studio, where I was working on a series of bowls for the upcoming exhibition, I thought about the text message that had started this entire transformation 6 months ago. The message I'd found on my phone the morning after the barbecue at 6:47 a.m. that had made everything crystal clear. It had been from Catherine, Roberto's fiancée, the woman who'd witnessed my mother's "kitchen staff eats later" comment and had seen through the family dynamics immediately. Jessica, I can't stop thinking about yesterday. I've never seen a family treat someone the way yours treated you at that barbecue. You deserve so much better than being invisible labor for people who should be celebrating you. I hope you know that what I witnessed wasn't normal or acceptable. You're worth more than they're giving you. Catherine. That message had been the external validation I'd needed to trust my own perception of what was happening. Sometimes it takes an outsider's perspective to help you see clearly what you've been living with for so long that it seems normal. Catherine had become a friend over the past 6 months, and she'd been one of my biggest supporters during the family transformation process. Her relationship with Roberto had actually improved as he'd witnessed his own family's growth and had started examining patterns in his own life. You started a revolution, she'd told me recently. Not just in your family, but in ours too. Roberto's been setting boundaries with his parents about financial expectations, and it's made all of our relationships healthier. That's the thing about personal transformation. It ripples outward in ways you never anticipate, inspiring others to examine their own lives and relationships. As I grabbed my keys and headed out into a Saturday that belonged entirely to me, I felt profound gratitude for the journey I'd taken. Not gratitude for the exploitation I'd endured, but gratitude for finding the courage to end it. Gratitude for learning that love doesn't require martyrdom. Gratitude for discovering that I was worthy of respect, consideration, and genuine care. I'd spent 23 years believing that my value came from what I could do for other people. Now I knew that my value was inherent, that I deserved love and respect simply for being who I was, not for what I could provide. The family barbecue next month would be a celebration in more ways than one. It would celebrate whatever we were officially gathering to honor, but it would also celebrate the fact that we'd learned how to be a family that includes everyone rather than exploiting someone. And I would be there, not as kitchen staff who eats later, but as Jessica Martinez, beloved daughter and sister, valued for who I am rather than what I can do. That transformation had been worth every difficult conversation, every moment of guilt, every relationship that had to be renegotiated or rebuilt, because now, finally, I was free to be fully myself, and that person was worth celebrating. Looking for more? We've got 2 amazing stories ready for you right on screen. If this one touched you, these are absolutely worth your time. Click to watch them now. And hey, subscribe and hit that bell to never miss our latest uploads.